Family homelessness has tripled in the last decade. In 2000, 206 homeless families were sheltered by the Homeless and Travelers Aid Society. In 2010, 762 families were sheltered. So it has tripled in the last decade. In 2010, the number of infants went up 35% in 1 year. Those are children under the age of 1. So that's the #1 problem right now.
Now these are recent stats. Now obviously this has been something that's been going on forever. And what do the stats look like beyond that? If you rewind the clocks back, say 10 years, how does it compare to what's going on now?
Well, actually, family homelessness, as we know it today, has really only emerged since the 70s.
Okay.
And that was due to many things, but in part, during the 1970s and the 1980s, the number of divorces went up. If you think back to when we were children in the 60s and even before that, most families were still two-parent families. But in the late 60s, early 70s, things really changed on the home front. And most homeless families are led by one person, and that's usually a female. So families lose that breadwinner that you and I had growing up. And so that really changed the number of homeless families. And then it just kept creeping up and up. But what's happened in the last 10 years is different. And that's primarily due to the recession and the lack of affordable housing.
How do you reach out to people so that they know where to turn, so that they know that there's help? Is there an outreach program? Does somebody contact these families? What's the process? Just for the people at home, I mean, what?
Sure.
So, go ahead.
Well, when families become homeless, we are usually the last place that they come to.
Okay.
Because first they will seek out friends and other family members.
Okay.
By the time they come to us, they're very desperate. And so we don't usually go searching for them. Their friends, their families, other homeless people, the Department of Social Services will send them our direction.
Okay.
So as it stands now, we really don't do outreach per se. We work with families once they come to us and they say that they're homeless and that they need shelter.
This topic is just something that people don't think about, but it does exist. And you know, the stats you just mentioned, people don't really think about it too often. But I was taking a look at your website and I saw some of the information on there, and it's quite astounding how many people actually. What the numbers are as far as homelessness goes.
There were over 1,500 homeless children in our region just last year. And I think we don't think about it because New York State has a right to shelter law. So you don't really see homeless children on the street. And that's, of course, something that most people don't know. New York State, in 1979, a young lawyer in the city, in the Bowery, sued the governor, because every day on his way to work he was passing a homeless man, and it got to upset him. And so he sued the governor, and from that came what we call the right to shelter law. So if you think about it, you don't really see homeless children and homeless families on the street. You don't really see many homeless single adults on the street here in New York. Now if you went out west to Los Angeles or Seattle or Portland, where I came from before I came here, you would see thousands of homeless single adults on the street. But New York has a right to shelter law.
Now when you say we see homeless people, and this is one of the things that we had talked about in our leadership class, is that typically people have a stereotype as to what a homeless person looks like.
Sure.
But you shed a little light on that. Can you share a little bit of that with the audience?
Well, I think when we think about homeless people, most of us have a picture in our head. It's a guy, he's about 45, 50. He probably has trouble with alcohol. He doesn't have a job. And so that's just the stereotypical image of a homeless person. We don't think about 224 infants being homeless, or 358 toddlers being homeless, which is what we had in 2010 just in Albany County. So we need to re-gear our thinking about homelessness. Actually, the majority of homeless people quickly are becoming children.
I guess to that end, the typical reasons why people become homeless, there's a lot of them.
Yes.
And again, it's something that could happen to any of us. What are some of the reasons that things like this happen?
If you've got a place to live now, you become homeless oftentimes because you can't afford to pay the rent. But why you can't afford to pay the rent, that's where things get complicated. You might have lost your job, but actually it's more than that. If you think about the minimum wage, which is just over $7 an hour, you could work full-time and not be able to afford an apartment in Albany or really anywhere around Albany. So it's not just Albany. If we think about the difference between what we call the minimum wage and the living wage, it's substantially different.
Now, what is, just for people that know, what is the difference? Can you just give a little explanation on that?
Nationwide, the living wage is just over $17 an hour. Here locally, it's just over $13 an hour, because that's what we figure it takes. And this is done through an array of economic calculations. What does the average apartment cost? And not talking about a fancy apartment, talking about an average one-bedroom apartment. Then on top of an apartment, you have utilities. You know, this was a really hard winter, so you had to spend a lot of money on heat this winter. So once you add up all of those things, we come up with what we call the living wage. And here locally, it's just over $13 an hour. But the minimum wage is $7 an hour. So let's say you're making $10 an hour. So more than the minimum wage. A lot of people would say, okay, that's not bad, but that's not enough for a one-bedroom apartment.
Right, and then you know, on top of that, you add a family and other expenses. You know, and it clearly there's a disconnect there, and it's just not enough for people to be able to live a life.
Just buying diapers. This past February, we partnered with KeyBank for a diaper drive, because I started thinking about the number of homeless infants that we see, and more than infants, because children wear diapers much longer than that usually, and how expensive are diapers? Well, any mom or dad would tell you, wow, that's a big...
I remember.
That's a big expense, right? And then you've got diapers, and then you've got pull-ups, and you've got wipes and creams and all of those things, right? So you're homeless, you're on the street, you've got 2 kids, you've got 2 or 3 bags with you, because that's all you can literally carry, and you're trying to find a place to spend the night. Where are you buying diapers? How do you buy diapers? And so we partnered with KeyBank to do this diaper drive in February. Okay. And it was just over 6,000 diapers that people donated through their local KeyBank branch, and our Leadership Tech Valley class through the Albany Colony Chamber also helped out with that drive, and that was great. So through these things we can help families, but it does help people understand the small details to being homeless, because we think about homelessness as a broad issue, but when you think about diapers, that's very specific, and you realize how hard was it to raise your young children in your own home with a support system. It's tough.
It's hard. It's hard even with all that going.
Right.
And I can't imagine without it. And you know, the diaper drive you mentioned, that's people helped out. What are some other things that people can do? How can the audience watching at home, if people want to help, what can they do?
We've got a new campaign called Change for Change, and it's 30 cents a day, $10 a month. If you can say to yourself, homeless children are worth 30 cents a day to me, then you can be part of the Change for Change campaign. And it's part of what we were talking about earlier. We don't want to shelter homeless children. We want to prevent them from becoming homeless, and that's what the Change for Change campaign is about. 2,500 donors is what we're looking for, to say 30 cents a day, $10 a month. That's worth it to me to prevent homelessness.